What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another edition of the 415ers podcast, Odyssey Sports Podcast Network 95.7 The Game. Evan Giddings, Marc Grandi with you as always. Marc, I know you're a little pissed at me, so before we get into the 49ers, as we do always, please forgive me. I beg of you, please. I apologize. I am sorry that I messed with your pick earlier today. You can fill the people in on what we're talking about.
So if you guys faithful listeners of the 415ers know I do like to venture into the gambling world a little bit. I'm not so sure I'd go as far to call myself a degenerate. But I had a bet on a college basketball game earlier this afternoon. It is Wednesday currently. You're probably listening to this on Thursday. But I like to bet on some college basketball, and I bet on Tennessee, big favorite on the road in Vanderbilt,
Oh,
an
boy.
SEC matchup, part of a parlay. They're a big favorite. I just took the money line, not to cover any spread. And they were up by 2 in the final seconds, had an open dunk to make it a 4-point game. Instead, whoever it was, I'm not going to call out anyone individually by name, whatever idiot decided to, instead of taking a sure 2-possession lead, try to dribble out some more clock, got fouled. They ultimately missed the front end of a 1-and-1, keeping it a 2-score game. And then Vanderbilt hits a 3-pointer at the buzzer. Tennessee loses, and I lose my bet. All the while that was happening, Evan was kind of poking me and prodding me about my bet. And
I thought the game was over,
that.
Marc. My bad.
It's never over, especially when you have money on it, okay? I'm sitting here with my fingers crossed, sweating it out, and you come in and it was bad. It was bad.
Thank you for forgiving me, although you never technically said it. Yeah,
I don't think I'm going to say it.
That's okay. No bueno, no good news there for Marc Grandi. However, there is good news in San Francisco and Santa Clara because Brock Purdy officially has decided when to get his surgery and which surgery to get, and that will undergo on February 22nd. The report is that Brock Purdy will have a repaired UCL, not reconstruction. He avoids Tommy John. Evidently, the second opinions or the third opinions or the fourth opinions result in him, heading towards the 6-month timeline, which is kind of fitting for what we have heard from the 49ers camp in the front office and Kyle Shanahan. So everything appears to be A-okay for Brock Purdy as far as, obviously you'd love to avoid surgery, but they avoid disaster with him being out for longer than 6 months. And Marc, I know that you were trending towards, you thought this would be the case the entire time. I was a little bit more pessimistic, but I am glad to hear that Brock Purdy will be good to go by, it appears, about August 22nd.
Yeah, this was the report from Ian Rappaport of NFL Network earlier on Wednesday. He's going to get the procedure done by the Texas Rangers in Major League Baseball, their team doctor. The reason why is because, baseball team doctors generally are more familiar with UCL injuries because of how rampant Tommy John is in baseball. So I think probably a good choice in terms of the surgeon. However, Evan, I know the news is it is likely still going to be the repair, but as far as I understand it, and I'm not calling myself an expert on elbows and UCL injuries by any stretch of the imagination, but as far as I understand it, you can't really tell if you're going to need the repair or the full reconstruction until you actually open up and see the actual ligament, because it has to do with how healthy the ligament is. Now, I think it is good news that all of the second opinions, third opinions, fourth opinions that they got, there's nothing alarming that they're seeing that makes them think Tommy John is necessary. But as I understand it, Evan, you don't know until you actually open up that elbow and get a look with your own eyes at the ligament. You're not really going to be able to tell much by an MRI in regard to that, other than just, yes, it's torn. But is the ligament healthy enough to where it can, work with a repair as opposed to a full reconstruction? I'm not so sure that you can see that until you actually start the surgery. So yes, good news that there hasn't been any red flags up to this point, Evan, but I still think the biggest hurdle is when this surgery actually takes place, that they don't see anything unexpected. I'm not saying I think it's likely that they will be surprised. I think it's a very good chance that it will be smooth and it will go as expected, but I'm not so sure we're quite over that hurdle just yet.
No, that's a good point. I was just going off of the Ian Rappaport report, like you mentioned, which mentions towards the end that he will be, allowed to make a full recovery and be ready, quote unquote, by training camp. But you're right. And the Dr. Keith Meister, who'll be performing the surgery, I guess will have the final say over everything. Because once, like you said, you open that thing up and you see what the damage actually is, I guess a pivot potentially could be made. But for the purposes of this conversation, Mark, I want to dive into it the way that, the report mentions with him being back. And it does, we're both kind of on the same page as far as Brock Purdy and Trey Lance, at least the hierarchy under equal circumstances right now. Does this change anything in your eyes? I guess we don't technically know until the surgery is performed, but to me, this is great news if you're the 49ers. And it sounds like, honestly, from the kind of comments that have been leaking out and trickling out, it does seem like this was what they were assuming as well.
The fact that they still think they need just the repair, again, the shorter timeline in terms of recovery, not full Tommy John, that does not surprise me at all. However, Evan, I was a little surprised to see the date. They're expecting to get this done on February 22nd. That'll be almost 4 weeks removed from when the injury happened. And you start to look at the timeline here. I know what Ian Rappaport said is, quote, this surgery on the 22nd of February will allow Purdy to, quote, make a full recovery and be ready for training camp. Are you sure about that? Because every timeline that we've seen is 6 months. So let's say everything goes off without a hitch on February 22nd, Evan. He gets UCL repair surgery, not the full Tommy John, just the repair. He throws in 3 months. That would be May 22nd. And then he's cleared and ready to go on September 20, on August 22nd. That is 6 months out. Well, training camp generally starts on the 26th of July, give or take a couple of days here or there for a number of NFL teams, but right around that date at the end of July. The preseason starts August 3rd with the Hall of Fame game, but most teams' first preseason game will be on August 13th. The second preseason game, August 20th. Again, remember the key date for Brock Purdy, 6 months after the surgery, is August 22nd. That's 2 days after the Sunday of week 2 of the NFL preseason. So let's just assume that it is a normal recovery and Brock Purdy is ready to go after 6 months. He would have 1 week to get ready for one preseason game. Then he has a bye week and then week 1 of the NFL season, Evan. I am not so sure that Brock Purdy, that the 49ers are going to feel incredibly comfortable with Brock Purdy that early in the season coming off of this injury if he does not break the expected recovery timeline. If you're just giving him the 6 months, which is what everyone has said about this injury, Evan, he's not going to have much time before the start of the regular season. That's why I'm wondering, why are they taking so long to get this surgery done? I know they wanted to be careful and do their homework and avoid surgery if at all possible, but why are there these 2 weeks between the announcement of the surgery and when he's actually having the surgery? Because those 2 weeks, you get them back in August, that could make a big difference.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I would imagine, again, neither of us are doctors, but I would imagine it's procedural. I imagine there are things that Brock Purdy needs to undergo in order for the doctor to complete the surgery. And I'm sure that the date they picked is as soon as possible, or at least I would hope so. As far as being completely ready for training camp, I am with you that the timelines don't match up, and it is maybe optimistic. But again, the 6 months is not the period in which he will be unable to move. The first 3 months are when he cannot use his arm, and then he will eventually ramp up over the last 3 months. And should the surgery go successfully, I think there is reason to believe that Brock Purdy could return, maybe not for full contact, maybe not to be ready to be thrust into a preseason game, but be available for training camp. And that's where kind of the the full participant or completely ready or back to health insinuation from the report is a little bit dicey. But I do believe that Brock Purdy according to everything that we've heard, will be available for training camp, will be around, and will be able to throw, most importantly. So obviously the 49ers will err on the side of caution. But what it does mean, as if you're talking about timelines for me, Mark, it does mean that Trey Lance is going to have maybe 2 more extra weeks of offseason to prove to the 49ers that, of course, he deserves to be QB2 or maybe even QB1 if things don't go well with Brock Purdy, but to prove to himself and the entire coaching staff that he is a potential person that they have to weigh. Because the next part of it is, well, let's say Brock Purdy comes back and he's not as good as he was last year. Well, Kyle Shanahan has told us he has two starting caliber quarterbacks. That means that if there's a scenario where the 49ers stumble out of the gates, they obviously have aspirations to compete in the NFC West. Things don't look great. If Trey Lance looks amazing in OTAs, if he looks amazing in training camp, he looks good in preseason, and he continues to play his ass off in practice, there could be potentially a scenario where if Brock Purdy hasn't responded the way that people had hope from his surgery, whether that's procedural, whether it's he's just not as good, Trey Lance has a chance to change some people's minds. Like, that's the other part of this that I see.
Yeah, I think you're right there. That this is a huge opportunity for Trey Lance. I think the other thing that maybe we're not even considering, and maybe it shouldn't be considered until it happens potentially. But we talk about the timeline for Brock Purdy, and the way that I see it, Evan, if it is on schedule, that's almost an issue. At least it feels to me, just based on the pure timeline of it. And I understand what you're saying. Just because it's not quite 6 months out doesn't mean he's not on the field, at least working on things by himself. Maybe he's not cleared for full practice and they don't want, anyone on the defense breathing on him at that point. I understand. But that's just 6 months. That's not even if he's beyond the recovery timeline. Like, we're talking, the bad news is the 6 months timeline. What if there is some kind of holdup? What if his elbow doesn't quite respond? What if his recovery is delayed a couple of weeks? Then suddenly he's not fully cleared until this regular season starts. I mean, and when have things gone smoothly for the 49ers at the quarterback position? I feel like us calling the 6 month timeline, recovery window, whatever you want to say, and treating that as at the latest he'll be good by then. I feel like history tells us we shouldn't be doing that because something will happen this offseason for the 49ers at the quarterback position that we haven't been expecting. And then I think that's what you're talking about comes in. That's where Trey Lance needs to have a fantastic preseason, a fantastic offseason specifically, and make Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers feel comfortable about him potentially opening the season as their starting quarterback. I'm not saying I think that's going to happen. But all I'm saying is you are one setback away from Brock Purdy and his elbow from Trey Lance being the starting quarterback week 1. That's not totally out of the world of possibility. That is imminently possible given everything that's happened to this 49er quarterback position.
Which is also why the next question becomes, okay, who's the third guy? And I know there's been not even rumors, but suggestions floated around by 49ers legends, by people in the media about a potential return of Jimmy Garoppolo. I, for one, Mark, will take Kyle Shanahan at his word when he says he does not foresee any scenario in which Jimmy Garoppolo returns. But the sort of void of Garoppolo, which is open now, I mean, there's going to be a competition for the third spot. And I do think with the scenario that you've laid out, or the questioning and kind of the I don't know, potential need of a second quarterback for the 49ers, whoever they bring in does become more important heading into next season. And I do think that it should be a priority to have a third quarterback that they trust and believe can start, because there's a very real scenario in which they may need a third quarterback for a second straight season. If you're looking at a guy coming off UCL surgery, a guy who's in his third year and unfortunately is coming off of injury and hasn't proven yet to us that he can be the franchise quarterback or even QB1 for an extended period of time, that third quarterback position might be the most important QB3 in the league.
It might be. I'll tell you what, I am not that worried about the third quarterback. I think there's a very real chance, as you're saying, that it becomes an important position for the 49ers. But I'm not spending too much time trying to figure out who it is, because if I am an NFL quarterback who either maybe I'm a veteran who's way past his prime, just looking for potentially my last job in the NFL. I would want a spot where maybe I'm for sure the backup, and I'm only one injury away from, being the quarterback. Maybe even a chance where you feel like maybe you can compete for the starting job. That's not the case with the 49ers. I know that people have thrown out Andy Dalton. People have thrown out Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan has a connection to Kyle Shanahan, of course, from their time in Atlanta. I don't know. Maybe that happens. Maybe they do what I don't think they will do and accept a third string job with the 49ers. I just feel like that's not in those guys' DNAs who have been starting quarterbacks for much of their career at this level. I think the 49ers would be going after a career backup, a guy similar to a Nate Sudfeld, similar to something like that, who they had in camp and signed to a guaranteed deal last year. That, or they draft a guy or two in the fifth or sixth round of this upcoming draft. There's a real good chance, as you laid out, that the Niners' third string quarterback is important once again in 2023. But I'm not wasting too much, time trying to figure out who that is. It's an important decision, of course, but I'm not so sure the names that are being thrown around are going to come to fruition. Because if you are a quarterback who has accomplished decent things at this league, why would you come to a team where you're going to be the third string quarterback? I know there's a possibility of injuries. And if you had to bet on injuries at any one position across the league, maybe you might bet on the Niners quarterbacks just because of what has happened the last couple of years. But I'm not so sure that those guys are going to be willing to come to the 49ers.
Yeah, and who knows? Look, if San Francisco wants to stick with their guys, and like you said, draft a quarterback or bring in even someone like not exactly Josh Johnson, but someone along the lines of Josh
Yeah.
Johnson, then that might be interesting to keep an eye on as well.